Hello, I'm Clarisse Fortuné. Welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24. Coming up, working 24 hours to save the economy. Ghana launches a new policy that extends economic activity beyond conventional hours in various industries. But some are asking how the estimated $4 billion needed for this policy will be allocated. With aid cuts and rising debt, how can Africa fund its own future? We'll talk about solutions, investments, and the end of dependency with our guest. Still seeking justice for Hawa in Mauritania after the 18-year-old girl was raped and killed. Convictions are rare in a conservative society where silence prevails, and rape cases are often settled privately between families. Ghana launches its 24-hour economy program. That's the country's latest initiative to re-engineer its productivity by extending economic activity beyond conventional hours. It's designed to harness the potential of every Ghanaian every hour of the day in agriculture, manufacturing, textile, etc. However, analysts question how Ghana, still under an IMF bailout program, plans to allocate the estimated $4 billion needed for the initiative, dubbed 24-Hour Plus. Here's our Ghana correspondent, Justice Baidu.
According to President John Mahama, this initiative is expected to break the cycle of Ghana being an import-driven economy. As at 2023, Ghana's import alone made up to 35% of its gross domestic product, with its export making up only 34% of GDP, according to the World Bank. To start up this initiative, the government says it is immediately opening up the country's major harbors to operate 24 hours around the clock as opposed to the 8 hours that it does now, to drive up export and import, especially within the sectors that the country has a comparative advantage. Other agencies like the Passport Office and the Driver License Delivery Office, for example, that has a backlog of requests for its services, would now also move to working 24 hours as opposed to the 8 hours that it does now, driving up its ability to be able to employ more hands in its work. The government says the initiative would be a hybrid of private and public sector initiatives, with the government creating the enabling environment for sectors like agribusiness, energy to thrive and grow Ghana's economy.
Talking about economy, heads of state are gathered in Seville to talk about financing development as global aid shrinks and debt levels soar. African countries are being forced to rethink how they fund their future. From Washington to Addis Ababa, the message is clear. It's time to move beyond dependence and build smarter, more sustainable financing models. With donor fatigue, rising youth populations, and persistent instability, the stakes couldn't be higher. Joining us now is Jackie Cilliers, founder of the Institute for Security Studies, to help us unpack the road ahead. Thank you very much to join us. U.S. development aid to Africa has seen significant cuts in recent years, and other donors are shifting priorities. So what is the real impact of this trend on African economies?
Well, aid to Africa has been largely flat for a number of years in absolute numbers, because it's been squeezed out by the numbers of aid that has been used for in-country refugee assistance, as well as Ukraine. But it is important to recognize that aid remains important. So the US reduction affects about 1/3 to a quarter of all aid to Africa. So it's serious. But for low-income countries, and Africa has 21 low-income countries and 23 low-middle-income countries, development aid still remains important. Because remember that these countries don't have much to trade with. And overseas direct investment doesn't really come to poor countries. So they still need aid. And of course, they need to use it more efficiently. And of course, the focus needs to be on domestic revenue collection. But aid remains an important consideration for Africa's development.
So maybe we need to change the aid model, because there's been so much debate about Africa's reliance on aid. So can or should Africa realistically wean itself off traditional aid models?
Well, aid has a very bad reputation in many circles. But what people don't recognize is since the 2005 Paris conference, and there was Busan and Addis Ababa, and now the Seville events, there have been a significant restructuring of aid. So aid, which was an instrument of Cold War power and patronage during the 1980s, has changed. Most of the aid goes to poor countries. And the focus really is on seeing aid as catalytic. Yes, there's no doubt that Africa needs to get rid of aid. But I say again, poor countries, the 21 low-income countries, don't attract much investment, and they don't have much to trade with. So the idea that somehow trade or investment is going to replace aid is that's not going to work. Of course, what African countries need to do is to maximize domestic revenue collection. And that's, for example, where aid can play a role by making government more efficient, making sure that tax loopholes are changed, and of course to make African economies more productive. But these are multi-generational initiatives that take a lot of time. So I'm afraid that aid remains important for poor countries.
Can you, though, offer other solutions like raising revenue at home?
Yes, no, that's why I make the point that domestic revenue collection is important. And then at Seville, there have been lots of discussions about blended finance, about taxing tax in Africa, domestic revenue collection, but also the issues around taxing global wealth, credit rating agencies, and so on. So the most important probably for Africa is to change the institutional and legal frameworks on how Africans deal with inflows of foreign direct investment, of aid, and remittances. Because remember that at the moment, remittances in actual fact have become larger than either aid or foreign direct investment. And remittance inflows from the diaspora into Africa has become quite a large source of finance for Africa. And that's something else that needs to be instrumentalized and used to better effect.
Can we talk about like a case study? DRC, the Republic of Congo, was among USAID's top 10 beneficiaries worldwide. That's second largest in Africa. $251 million that supported, for example, health initiatives in 2023 in a country that only allocates 13% of its budget to health. So put that in that equation, the fact that 97, there's a lot of numbers there, the informal sector represents 97% of the economy. So trying to tax revenues is a bit complicated, isn't it?
Yes, so most African economies are dominated by the informal sector. And the informal sector is a survivalist sector. People go there because they have no opportunity in the formal sector. But for every example that you can mention about African governments not spending enough on, for example, on health, I can use an example like Ethiopia, where the Ethiopian government, particularly under Meles Zenawi, very effectively utilized the aid that it got from the United States to invest in reducing maternal mortality rates, infant mortality. And you can read the testimony that was given in front of the US Congress by the Gates Foundation, the head of the Gates Foundation, who is certainly a private sector person, who pointed to the benefits, the lives that have been saved by what the Gates Foundation has done with health. So aid is not a solution for Africa. Africans need to take responsibility for their own development, but aid remains important as a catalyst if used well. And there are many examples of river blindness and other examples where that aid has really alleviated suffering. None of that excuses the fact that Africans need to improve governance, enhance domestic revenue collection, and use the funds that they get much more responsibly and transparently than was the case thus far.
Jacques Cilliers, founder of the Institute for Security Studies. Thank you very much. There's so much more to discuss, but we don't have time for everything. Thank you very much. And still talking about the economy, the finding is alarming. Senegal has become the most indebted country in Africa. Earlier this year, the IMF established that Senegal was carrying huge levels of hidden debt. Now, a new report from the British bank Barclays puts the country's debt at 119% of GDP. That's nearly double the regional average in sub-Saharan Africa. And since taking office last year, President Bassirou Diomaye Faye has launched sweeping efforts to audit the previous administration's accounts and bring transparency to the country's finances. Our correspondent in Dakar, Caitlin Kelly, has the details.
Senegal is now the most indebted country in Africa. That's according to a new report from UK bank Barclays, who put Senegal's public debt at 119% of GDP, far above the 99.7% cited in a recent national audit. That makes Senegal just one of 3 countries on the continent, including Zambia and Cape Verde, with debt levels above 100%. This revelation has sent shockwaves through financial markets, and Senegal's dollar bonds have plunged. The news also complicates already stalled negotiations with the International Monetary Fund, who froze a $1.8 billion support program while waiting for clearer data on the country's finances. For Senegal, this means that it will be forced to borrow at an even higher interest rate in the coming months. Since his election last year, President Bassirou Diomaye Faye has ordered a sweeping audit of hidden debts, which has been a steep climb for the administration to achieve. Here in Senegal, experts say it could take a decade to bring the debt back to a level below 100%, possibly jeopardizing the ambitious and much-needed development plans that were in the country's future.
A few weeks ago, Hawa was raped and killed in Mauritania. She was just 18. The crime sparked protests in front of the National Assembly demanding justice. According to civil society groups, Hawa's case is far from isolated. The number of rapes and murders is on the rise. Convictions are rare in a deeply conservative society where silence prevails and rape cases are often settled privately between families. More from our correspondents Maimouna Lo and Kathleen Kelly.
In the suburbs of Nouakchott, this centre welcomes female victims and survivors of violence, like this 17-year-old, who was raped by a relative and fell pregnant. She says she reported the attack in vain.
We went to the police. They said they would do tests, but they never did. They asked for the phone, but when we brought it, they didn't even check it. They only jailed him for 3 days, then released him, and to this day he's still free. I demand justice.
This case is not unique. The NGO supporting this victim handled around 400 rape cases last year, but say convictions are rare. A vague legal definition of rape makes law enforcement difficult. Victims sometimes risk jail, particularly if accused of having consensual extramarital relations, criminalized by law.
Did she go out with the man? What kind of veil was she wearing when she went out at night? These are the kinds of questions that are always asked to discredit or misclassify these cases. It's not easy at all.
To better protect victims, a 2023 bill aimed to criminalise all forms of violence against women. But the controversial text was withdrawn as soon as it was introduced to Parliament.
What we're hearing is that there may be clauses that go against Islamic Sharia law. That's very surprising, considering the government has all the tools needed to draft a law that isn't contrary to Sharia. And even if that were the case, it's a bill submitted to Parliament. A lawmaker's job is to amend the law.
Activists say a new version of the bill is urgently needed to ensure justice for women and girls.
And this report concludes our edition of Eye on Africa. Thank you for watching France 24.